Hello, my name is Pauline Tomlin. I'm based in Leeds, lived in Leeds all my life, and I was an educator in the Leeds education system and abroad for a 15-year period. However, currently I've completely transitioned into something different and I'm now in the arts. Okay, how and why I became a teacher. Right, okay, it's purely accidental, to be honest. I was pursuing a completely different path. I had been a manager in media agencies, advertising agencies in Leeds for about 12 years at that point. And I think I had a staff of about three. And one day we were just having a good laugh in the agency. And the media director came over and said, "That's your problem, Pauline. You just don't take this seriously enough." And I kind of laughed and looked at him and went, "Well, we don't save anybody's lives and we don't teach anybody anything. It's advertising." I was like, it's the first budget that goes if a client's in problems. And I think me saying that was something in my spirit, kind of like saying, maybe it's time. Do you know what I mean? I loved it. It was great. It was full on. It was really fast. It was very stressful. And I think it's becoming increasingly stressful because I had three small children at the time. So in their next round of redundancies, in inverted commas, I was first out the door. So I was like, okay, what do I really want to do? And at this point, I thought I want to do something that fits more with my children. I really wanted to go back to the singing that I'd done in my teens and early 20s. And I found this course called Access to Music, which would train people like myself who had a significant amount of musical experience, but we didn't necessarily have a music degree in order for us to become facilitators, workshop facilitators, whether it be guitar or voice or whatever. And then we could go into schools and provide workshops as a peripatetic type workshop deliverer. And I thought, well, that'd be great because it'd fit with my kids. I could do it when I wanted to do it and I'd still be, and I'd be an entrepreneur, which is something I've always wanted to do anyway. As a part of that course, I needed to have a placement in a school. My son had just gone to high school, I think. So I asked at his school. They said yes. Got a placement in the music department. Loved it. The kids seemed to really respond to me and they kept saying to me, "My God, you're really good with these kids." And then the lady who was a Senko at the time was like, "Oh, we're desperate for, teaching assistants. And I know your course is only part-time. Will you do part-time teaching assistant for us?" And I went, "Okay, fine." So I was part-time teaching assistant and part-time doing the course. And literally, and no word of a lie, the day my course finished, she came up to me and said, "Right, I know your course is finished. Can you do full time for us?" And I was like, "No, but I'll do 4 days a week." So I did that so I was 4 days a week. I was then a teaching assistant in the school. And then whilst I was being a teaching assistant, again, very good response from the children. A lot of the teachers, as soon as they saw me walk in the door, would be like, "Oh, thank God it's you." Because they knew that their class was going to be a calmer space. I tended to anticipate what was going on. I've got eyes like a hawk. I think I've got very good peripheral vision. So I would see those kids who are like starting to mess about or be like, "Take that gum from under that desk and go put it in the bin. Get your pen out and start working." I'd just go up and whisper to them, let them know that I was aware of what they were doing. And so everything, I think, was a bit more stable. Plus, I don't mess. I'm not having it. Do you know what I mean? They're kids. So, so I think that meant that a lot of the teachers were like, "Oh, you should be teaching, you're really good with these kids." And it just, when that message keeps coming back and someone keeps saying something to you and you're like, no, I'm batting it away. But it kept coming back. And one teacher stopped me one day and she said, "I want to know why you're not teaching. You've got a degree, you're educated, it would only take you a year." And I thought, okay, something up there keeps pushing this message. Let me look into it. And I looked into it and found a course called the GTP, which is a graduate teacher program, which I don't think exists anymore, which meant that I had to get two pillars in place. I had to get a place on a course at Bradford College, but I also had to get a job as an unqualified teacher in a school. Once you got those two pillars in place, then you could train to be a teacher rather than going to university and doing course and then being in school maybe, once or twice a month. I was actually in school learning on the job, but then going to college once or twice a month, which would suit me better. because I had children at the time. And I thought if I've late lectures and stuff, I just can't do it. And I swear it was like, when you line up dominoes and they just fall, it was like that. And I do believe quite, powerfully that when things are meant for you, it happens smoothly. I couldn't believe how smoothly it happened. I literally went to see the head teacher, one of the deputy principals, sorry, at the time, and said, "Oh, I'm thinking of the graduate teacher program. You're part of the program, and we'd love to have you, Pauline. You've got a place." Didn't even interview me, nothing. I was like, okay, that's one pillar in place. Applied for the course, went for an interview. It really wasn't an interview, it was just a chat. Really good laugh with this guy who, I don't know, maybe it's because I was older. But yeah, and then the next thing I know, they offered me a place at the college. So I had the two pillars in place, and I suddenly went, oh, looks like I'm training to teach come September. And that was 2004-05. When I started my career, even though it was accidental, obviously I'm a black woman. I have children who are dual heritage, who have friends who are black, white, mixed, dual heritage, whatever. And I was just kind of wide-eyed and thought teaching education was going to be like when I was at school. And it wasn't. It became very apparent to me very, very quickly that there was a dire need for someone like me to be in there. I wasn't on a mission as such. I was just being myself. But myself is a very passionate person, does not like wrongdoing of any sort. I'm a great defender of the the underprivileged, or those who have been hard done to. And so I think I became a bit of a thorn in the side after a while, because for one, I would defend those children when they were being hard done to, shall we say, kicked out of classes. I'd see it was mostly the black and mixed boys who were on the corridors when I was, if I had a free period and I was walking from one space to another, they were the ones I would find in the corridor. I'd be like, get your ass back in that classroom. I'd pop my head back in and say, he's coming back in, which was great because it meant I had that kind of power. That was after I'd done my training and I was fully fledged as a teacher. Because I was like, you're not here to look at the paint dry in the corridor. And they'd be like, but Miss sees this. And I go, you've got to face it. I said, you see me one? Yeah? Do you see anybody else looks like me in here? It's not easy. But you got to take what you need to get from it. Don't make it personal. Yeah? You take what you need to get from it and get out of here, because it isn't going to be easy, but you're never going to win if you fight, because they're going to use the power of the system against you. So those kinds of things are the kinds of conversations I would have with a lot of the children. All children seem to like me because I'm kind of strict, and they know where their boundaries are. I guess some initially are fascinated until they knew who I was. And I think I became someone who, for those black, brown and children who had a dual heritage, they could finally see someone who could perhaps understand how things might be for them in a system, because children don't often have the language to articulate what it is they're feeling, but they know it doesn't feel nice, it doesn't feel good. And so I could perhaps put a voice to it and then calm their spirit down, express what was going on from a systemic point of view, and then perhaps give them some tools as to how they could bypass it, overcome it, or learn to deal with it. My career progressed quite rapidly, actually. And I think that was because, one, I was older. I did not train to teach till I was 40. I'd already had a career two careers by then. And I'm an ambitious person. I've always been an ambitious person. I don't do anything by halves. I know it's part of my personality. When I do something, I do it well, and I will always move forward, partly because I get bored. I need to be stimulated. So once I've done training, once I've been teaching for a year, I'm like, okay, what's next? What's next is progression. So I became, first of all, a deputy head of faculty. I left the school that I trained and become a teacher in, and then I became a head of faculty. Wow, that's an interesting journey, because there were hardly any that I saw. Whenever we had meetings, by educational meetings, or maybe someone's coming to lecture and you'd send someone, there was only me. There was usually only me that I saw when I first started. as a person of colour. And I don't just mean a black person, I mean a person of colour who was a head of faculty. There would just be me. In every school that I worked in, I was the only person of colour on the faculty who, let alone a faculty leader. What made it really challenging was that it's not until you confront the system and also the prejudice within the individuals, to be fair, because it's always individuals that are executing the prejudice, if you see what I mean. And you don't realize you're doing it, but I started to realize very, very quickly that my presence was a massive trigger for a lot of people in that system. I think the Caucasians are generally just used to being superior. They're used to having it their way. They're used to being able to slack off. They get away with murder, quite frankly. And someone like myself, I was constantly under scrutiny and I could feel it. I mean, at times it was palpable. You could literally feel it. It was almost like you felt people were waiting for you to fail, almost like they wanted to, that self-fulfilling prophecy to come true that, they can't hack it. And so I felt a real weight of responsibility, not just for myself personally, but also that who's coming behind me. I've got a responsibility to make sure I'm shit hot and I get this, and I make sure that this is right. Do you know what I mean? Because otherwise the door's going to close. They'll be like, well, we gave one of them a chance. She didn't do it. So, they can't hack it. And that would be it. So there was that pressure. Maybe that's a pressure I put on myself. I don't know, but I felt that. To the point where, now, the other thing is, to get there, you have to be damn good at what you're doing. Because it's not easy. They don't let you through. They don't just open the door and go, oh, we just need another head of English. Right, there you go. We'll pick you because you've been here the longest. It's not like that when you're a person of colour. You have to be like shit hot. Like, you have to be so good that it's undeniable. And you have to be bringing added value. I knew some of those appointments were tick list, but it didn't matter to me because I was in there and I was doing what I needed to do, which was represent, be the best that I could be for those kids, give them a sense of pride in who they were, make them realize that their stories are worth telling. And I know for one boy in particular, which was a very white school. In fact, was he the only black? I think he was one of 2 black children in that school. And he came quite old. He came from Kenya. And he took me one day. He was having a real hard time. I knew he was having a real hard time with his identity. And I took him and I said, don't you dare do that. Because he was thinking of bleaching. I noticed he was bleaching. I said, I can see it. No, miss, I'm not. I said, don't tell me. I know you are. I said, don't you dare. I said, I know this is hard. I said, and I just told him just how valuable he was, how he had his name, that he's connected to a landmass, he's connected to kings, he's connected to a wealth of history, and that he should never, ever, ever let anybody make him feel less than who he is. I said, and you see me standing here, I'm the only one as well. You see that? It's not easy. I said, but you've got to have pride in who you are. I said, because once you start reshaping yourself to fit, you'll never feel secure in who you're supposed to be. And his mother wrote me a letter telling me that when I'd left I think it was on the point he was leaving, she sent me an email or a letter, how proud she was and how happy he was, and that I had been a great role model for him, and I'd calmed him down at a time when he was really, really struggling, because he was very dark skinned as well. I mean, I'm dark skinned, but he was even darker than me. Beautiful colour, I loved it, but he was having real problems with that. So, but back to the challenges for myself, those things were challenges for me emotionally. But then I thought, well, I'm the only one here, so I'll just get on and do it. And so I thought, I'm here to motivate, inspire. But some of the things that they would do to show you that they are superior is they will do things like take your classroom away from you towards the end of the year. So you're carrying your stuff to different classrooms all over the place. It's a power play. But you still got to keep your mouth shut and walk with dignity and make sure that you show them that it's not getting to you, even though it is getting to you. I had one head of faculty when I was a second, and she would lie. She literally would lie through her back teeth. She would try to take the credit for all the initiatives that I started. So we got to the point where I said to her, I will never action anything you ask me to do unless you put it in writing. She said, well, what are you going on about? Just do. No. And there are times when I was afraid I was going to lose my job because I was having to say certain things and be a certain way, but I had to protect myself and my reputation. And I think what it taught me was that when you push back, they are a little bit scared actually. Because you are an unknown quantity to them, because they have all these stereotypical ideas of what a black person is. I'm a dark-skinned black woman. I've got a deep voice. They don't know. They just have all these stereotypes as to what that means. Maybe some of them are true if you push me too hard. But hey, so sometimes I think you would play on that a little bit just to get your own way. But I was always very exacting. But I think one of the things I felt was I always had to do things right. Absolutely, because I knew the minute I did anything that was not quite, I saw other teachers getting away with a whole load of nonsense, but no way could I do that. I had to have the most exacting and the highest standards for myself, no matter how tired I was, because I knew that that would be it. Any excuse and they would have you out the door. How I navigated being the only black faculty member, educator within each of these schools. I guess I just had, it's partly personality. It's partly what I was used to. Actually, my own education, I realize now there's a correlation, which I've just made the connection. I was always the only black child in my classes at school, nearly always. And sometimes there was another Asian, because this was before the Kenyan Asians came over. So there were very few Pakistanis and Asian children in school when I was at school. And I was always in the top classes. So I was nearly always the only black one, or one of two or three. So I guess it was just something I was familiar with. And I think by the time I'd started teaching, being 40 plus and a mother, I really didn't give a whatever about what anybody thought about who I was. I was in there to do what I was supposed to do. I loved the interaction with the children, all the children, and that was my job, and that was what I was there for. And so I took solace in that. I didn't have any friends really in there. I wasn't looking for any either, because in the staff room, I did not like the conversations that I heard in the staff room. More often than not, they were maligning the children. The only time I would say something was when I would stop to say, listen, this is what you're here for. And if you don't like children, then you need to do something else. Because, or I would challenge them when they're complaining about a particular child again. Because there was one child, for example, and I said, do you realize what a marathon that child has been through to get to school? That child's got a mother who's a drug addict and he lives with a grandmother who beats him. The fact that he's managed to get his uniform on, get himself dressed and get to school is a marathon. You've got to, make some kind of, what's the word? You've got to have some compassion for that and teach him in a way that he can respond to. Maybe not be down on him because he's forgotten his pen, and then he comes back at you because of, so things like that would happen. Which I really, really hurt me. I would hate that. So I'd always defend the children in that way. How else I navigated it was when I was a faculty head, I think when I look back retrospectively, I was a good leader. I used to play to the strengths of my team. I used to lead as a team. I always used to say, I don't know. I don't have all the answers. I'm looking for us to work together. And I always did things like, say, for example, we had a deadline, we had a lot of marking to do, and we had an inspection or whatever, and say 20 of us have got all our marking done, but someone's got their exam scripts and they've got a few left. I would just say, right, we're going to split them. And because I can do 5, you can do 5, you can do 5, you can do 5, and that gets done, rather than just, be so individualistic, because as far as I was concerned, we're a team. And I think that really worked because my teams always had really good results. Really, really good results. And I think it's because he felt supported. They knew they could come and talk to me if they needed to. And I didn't see myself as just, I'm the leader, top down management. This was the first school that I was at. So this is a school of about 12 to 1,500 pupils. And to give you an example, I used to do a lot of extracurricular things with the children wherever I could. This particular group of young men, there were about 9 of them. I told him I was taking them out because I knew a speaker was coming. It was a Black History speaker, and I can't remember the name of who it was. It was at the West Indian Centre in Leeds. And I said, I'm taking them out. And he was like, you're taking them? I was like, yes. I took these boys out because I wanted them to see. It's going to sound a little bit spiritual, but the divinity in them. I think what happens when a Black child is in a school in this system is they have no contact with their own divinity, with their own value, with their own sense of worth. And then they go into these spaces which keeps compounding just how bad they are, just how worthless they are. A lot of it's overt. More often than not, it's subtle and covert. And you don't know what it is, especially as a child, but you can just feel it. And it chips away and it chips away and it chips away at your self-esteem. And it is awful, because even I feel it. I've had to steel myself mentally and emotionally at times and say that is not the reality of who you are. Even just someone's response to you and you go, oh my God, what did I do? Oh, was it me? Was I too something or other? We tend to blame ourselves all the time because we're used to being on the back foot, where you even, and I know this is going to sound really silly, but sometimes I even notice that if I'm walking on a pavement, I'll be the first one to step off. Because I've been trained to kind of, defer. And it's awful. And I have to, even me as a big woman, I have to consciously go, no, I'm not doing that. So for the children, it is far worse because they don't know what's going on. They don't understand the systemic racism. They haven't studied Black history like I have. And they're just feeling the impact of it. And all I know is it just crushes your spirit emotionally. So I took these guys out. They saw this Black history teacher talking to them. They were the only young people in that crowd, the only young people. And as a result of how well they behaved, one woman in the crowd just spontaneously stood up and said to the whole congregation there, I just want to take my hat off to those young Black kings sitting over there, because she said they've come here, they have listened, and they have been an exceptional example of what our young people. Well, those boys were about 3 feet taller by the time they got out of there. Went to school the next day. Head teacher said, well, how was it? I said, well. And it took great pleasure in telling him just how a member of the public had stood up and commended those boys on their behavior and how princely and king-like they behaved. And they loved it. And they walked differently from that day on in that school. Why do I think there are so few Black and brown people in education in Leeds? Obviously, I can only speak to my experience and my generation, and we're probably a couple of generations on from me now. But why there is probably, I'm hoping, I don't know the terrain anymore because I'm not in it, but I'm hoping there are more. I suspect there are more, maybe not massively. I suspect if there are more, most of them are probably in primary, not so much in secondary. This is just my guessing. Why there aren't, I would say because most don't have a positive experience of education, so they probably don't want anything to do with it once they leave. I think also you've got to be a person who's a little bit like me, who I didn't realize at the time, but I was being a pioneer. Just the fact that I was physically in the classroom, not just for the Black and brown pupils, but for the white pupils as well. That in itself, I think, was me being an activist, although I didn't realize I was being an activist at the time, because most of them hadn't had any connection or encounter with a Black person, let alone a Black female. There's one school in particular, very monoculture. It was white, working class, quite a lot of poverty in an area of Leeds that is still very white. When I told my son I'd got the job there, he went, Mum, you're going into NF territory. I was like, oh, and I started to worry. I was like, oh my God, because I didn't know that. And yet when I went into that school, by the time I left, they loved me and I loved them, because at the end of the day, children are children, people are people. We all have the same makeup and we all want the similar things. And I think if you can speak to that in a person, then you will always find some synergy and connection. But there was no doubting when I first went in that they were like, what the is this? And the girls were resentful. They were looking me up and down. And I was a form tutor as well. You could tell they didn't want me as their form tutor. By the time half a term's gone, they wanted me as their form tutor. I was the first black teacher ever recruited in that school, which is what I could tell when they come into the classroom that morning and I'm their form tutor, and the looks that I got, and I thought, this lot, I've never encountered a black person before, ever. And by the time I'd left 4 years later, I was still the only black member of the faculty by the time I left. What I think could be done within this system regards mental health for black and brown children, there has to be a curriculum or part of the curriculum that makes them visible and makes them have value and have worth. And at the end of the day, when you look at history, there is no history without black and brown people. The whole world is founded on, we are the originators of the whole world. And just because white society has decided that they want to tell a different tale, don't make it so. So we have to tell the truth. And the truth is that most of Europe and European developments came from the Moors, who are black-skinned, dark peoples who developed things like, if you take it right back to the Dogon tribes who knew about astrology and Sirius B before they even invented the telescope. It was black peoples who invented the suture. You've got Imhotep, who was, all of these people need to be taught about as part of you've got to teach history as contemporaneous, kind of like, what's going on in Europe, but what was going on in Africa and the continent at the time, what was going on in the Indian subcontinent at the time, what was going on in, the East at the time, in China and Japan and all that. So you've got to teach it like that in a vertical way, rather than just this linear, one strand of history, we're European and this is what. Because actually, I'm sorry, but you talk about the Greeks being the founders of Europe, and they all went to Africa to study. They all went to Timbuktu, and that's where they got their knowledge from. And then all of a sudden they come back and they're enlightened, spreading all these wonderful theories. Well, they all got it from Africa. My biggest learning that I took from being an educator, on a personal level, that I love children. I love all of them, and that they're all beautiful. It was the best experience ever. I'm so grateful to education for giving me the interaction and the contact with the children, no matter what creed, colour, faith, whatever. They just loved them, and they're funny and they love truth. And I think that's why we connected so well, because they knew I'll give it to them straight. So I'm grateful for that on a personal level. My biggest learning as an educator has been that, as Audre Lorde says, the slave master's tools are not going to dismantle the slave master's house.